Here, and it's time for one of the last Beijing Winter Olympics 2022 updates before it actually gets going in a few days. And to start, we're just going to talk about a really fun, ridiculous thing that people have probably already heard of and that everyone has known really since the beginning when Beijing first pitched Beijing for the Winter Olympics. But the truth about Beijing, and particularly the mountain area north of Beijing, and there's a specific site called Zhangjiakou that is basically where the Olympics are happening, and this region does not get a lot of snow. And it actually had a particularly dry year, so what you get is something like this. You guys can all check it out. This is a place, this is an Olympics, a Winter Olympics without snow. This is not at all like, you know, this isn't Vancouver. This isn't any of these places. There isn't snow here. And there's even just a couple more. I mean, it's really ridiculous, and people didn't know how ridiculous it would be until it happened. But the fact there's actually a dry year, Beijing is basically just pumping in artificial snow to make all this happen. And other places are doing that, right, just to have the ski slopes open. But it's pretty funny to be doing this in February in Beijing when you're supposed to be having a Winter Olympics sort of ceremony event take place. It's just not happening because you have to basically make it fake, right? It's not happening in this sort of winter wonderland of Salt Lake City or whatever. This isn't happening. And the reason this happened is because a bribe is a bribe and the Olympics must go on. But the fact that Beijing won the Winter Olympics when it's not a winter destination was always a bit ridiculous. And so this is what we get instead. But that's just the fun thing to start this off with, because the real story here is that Beijing, and a lot of people are wondering if the Olympics might see a bit of a event separate from the main event. And that by that I basically mean, is there going to be a backlash to this event? Are there going to be athletes or activists or anyone else who starts to try and make a statement, take a stand while in Beijing? So this is something that the Communist Party obviously worries about, and nobody really did that in 2008 for various reasons. It was a while ago and it wasn't quite in the public eye in the same way. But now we live in a world where this is normal. Athletes sort of taking a stand on things is very normal, particularly in the United States. So the fact that this, if it doesn't happen in Beijing, that might actually be pretty weird, pretty interesting. There's pretty heinous stuff going on, and there's far worse things going on in China than there are in the United States, for example. But not saying anything about it is kind of the norm. Some people that have spoken out are basketball players like Enes Kanter, who I did a video on, and awesome enough, it turns out he's actually super genuine. He has a real story about genocide, oppression, all that kind of stuff in his native country of Turkey. So that's really good, but we'll see where this goes. But in general, Beijing is doing its utmost to make this not only a COVID-free Olympics, but also a political statement-free Olympics, right? This is supposed to be a Chinese celebration of the glory of modern China, and it's not supposed to be some sort of event where other people can take it over and make China out to be a villain or this or that. Party does not want that, and it can do certain things, right? So the basics of it is that everything any athlete does is definitely tracked and monitored. All their access to various things is limited, right? So you actually can't even use Google, Facebook, stuff like that in China anyway. But well, I mean, the American government, other people are already recommending that athletes bring burner phones because this, yeah, the fact that the basic, you can't avoid the fact you're going to get everything sort of bugged when you're there. But the real question is just, will you do it when the cameras are on you? How will that be played around the world? Obviously, anything that happened in China will probably just be kind of knocked off the airways. But it's also kind of a hard thing to do, because if someone is winning a gold medal in something that people are watching, and then says something, you can cut. I mean, it will look very awkward, and obviously anyone who's familiar with propaganda and various regimes and how things are maintained, how power is maintained, you can see how this kind of stuff can just happen, right? They will do it. You might have an awkward edit or cut, but kind of like how the ESPN News Center can really splice together a really awesome highlight reel within minutes, like as a game is going on. Well, censors in China are pretty good at this point at doing stuff like that when they're doing, right, they're sending media to domestic audiences. So that's one thing. And we'll see. The other side of it is, well, will this be covered as a major event in foreign countries, right? So let's say there was some sort of activist or some sort of, again, human rights kind of stuff. The people where the most likely people that will do anything, if anyone does anything, is probably the athletes themselves, right? So if you're a Chinese human rights activist, good luck getting within 100 miles of any of this that's going on. That's just not going to happen. But the more difficult, hard to control element of things are the athletes themselves. And like I said, we live in a world where athletes have a much stronger and more vocal social consciousness about things, and they're in a place that has a very dubious social consciousness in the way that anybody who's a Western athlete might think. So that's a real concern. And we'll see. Like I've said in other videos, everybody, particularly athletes, celebrities, they don't tend to antagonize China all that much because they want dollars, right? There's a question of greed and fear. And if you were an athlete, you might be a little afraid to do something when you're in China. Anyone who's been to Beijing, you land there. It's a pretty big, imposing sort of place. It very much feels like a political capital, and it's going to very much feel like a political capital under lockdown. Not official. I actually don't know if Beijing's it's still in a lockdown, but it is definitely going to feel like one. If you're an athlete, you have very small bubbles you're allowed to move around in. You can't go outside of them, that kind of stuff. That is the way it's going to look for them. Will that induce them to start making a fuss? Probably not. You never know. And the other side of this, which I also mentioned with that other basketball bad blood video people can check out, the one about Enes Kanter in part, is that the other side to this is that people obviously make money by doing deals that gives them sponsorships and all sorts of endorsements and stuff with Chinese companies, Chinese whatever. That's a great way to make a bunch of money. The other way to do it is also to build your profile, to build your credibility as some sort of basically quasi-political figure by taking a stand against China, right? So instead of being one of the people who just goes with it, maybe you have a smaller profile and you'll just think, hey, maybe I'll take a stand here because that is a way to kind of boost my following, I guess you could say. I basically boost my following. And that's not as big a deal for the Winter Olympics because there's just not as many really well-known sports and athletes, right? This isn't basketball, right? You don't have basketball. This is in the Summer Olympics. You don't have basketball. You don't have the famous runners. You don't have all the famous swimmers. You don't have that in the Winter Olympics. It's much more low profile. And, right, I mean, the Shaun Whites, those sorts of people, they're not quite on the same level. And it's just not really the same world, right? The social consciousness I've been talking about is much more prominent in football, in soccer around the world, in basketball, stuff like that. I mean, no one really hears about it with anything in the Winter Olympics sort of context or winter sports context, but hey, it doesn't mean it's not possible, right? And that's really a big deal. And in Beijing, in China right now, this is a major thing. This is a major consideration. Not so much because they're incredibly worried about it, but because everything feels so much more volatile and vulnerable right now. The whole Olympics is just such a problem for Beijing, not just because of these fun pictures of the lack of any snow for these Olympics. It's more the fact that it just goes against the basic way they're trying to deal with COVID, right? You're having this event, you're trying to show off, all of it is kind of off, like it's kind of an odd, doesn't quite mix together. People should check out the other videos I have on the Olympics. I've been following this for all the fun of seeing how it goes down. And that is something that you really don't want to have happen, basically, right? The Beijing just does not want any of this stuff to go wrong, and it can't really control things in the way it wants. Like, it wants nobody in this country, in China, to get COVID, to do anything, to cause any ruckus, but the Olympics often and historically have caused a huge ruckus. So that's a big thing. Beijing also expects individuals to toe the line. That's how it works in China, but it isn't what it is in the United States or in other countries or anywhere in the West right now, where people are freaking out about all sorts of perceived, slights on liberty, perceived expansion of government power. All that kind of stuff is really raw right now. So we'll really see how it goes. But this is the time for people to make a scene. And you never know. We might actually see some fireworks. So with that, I'm going to leave it at that, right? So get ready. The Olympics are starting in a couple days. It should be interesting. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out the other ones. Like this one if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you like more of this content. Definitely throw on notifications. And with that, I will see you next time